Football for me, it means people. Everyone who's involved for the right reasons. They want to play because they love the game, they want to be involved, and it brings connection between everyone, whether it's standing on the sides, whether it's in the crowd, just watching and not playing.
And with football being for everyone, whether you're a coach, a player, an aspiring player for the future, someone seeking a scholarship, a teacher, a youth worker, a professional, a volunteer, someone seeking to get involved in the game, a volunteer parent, whether they're reflecting on their journey and how they can understand their grassroots team, an aspiring academy coach, an academy coach yourself, no matter what and no matter where you're listening, this podcast is really for you. On the Reflective Coach podcast, there are so many wonderful guests that feature on a podcast, whether this is former professionals, current professionals, and professionals of all backgrounds within the Coaching Insight series that really inspire, understand, support, and are reflective amongst this journey as they share their own insights, experiences, their own journey, their own reflections, strategies, insights, and other stories into the Reflective Coach podcast. Each week features a new guest, and each new guest brings something new to the podcast. I've been so lucky to have so many wonderful guests on, and you can really listen to all the episodes on Spotify, YouTube, and Podcast Addict, with continuous updates on Twitter and LinkedIn. By subscribing, commenting, following, engaging with all the posts amongst social media, you can really keep up to date with all the episodes.
I think it would just be, obviously, you expect everybody to be welcoming, be friendly, because like Leigh said, sometimes if you're introducing a new player, it can be quite daunting, especially if you've got players that have been together for 5, 6 years. They'll all know each other, they'll all be obviously friends, so your expectations of your players is to be welcoming and be friendly so that this player can come in and they can join and they can enjoy themselves playing football, and it's not the daunting of I'm not in.
Doing so much, or people might see it as spread yourself so thin, gives you a better perspective on other people's point of view. So if I was going to go work with another coach and they're in a setting that works with 18-month to 3-year-olds, I mean, I haven't done that for a long time, but I've done it before. And Leigh, you might think from, say, like a county FA perspective, you could bring things from your experiences in grassroots.
But we set the expectations, how you'll see us on a training night and how we behave, and on a match day how we behave. You won't hear us shouting and screaming like you might see the coach next to us doing. You'll see us making notes and having conversations with parents, having the honest conversations and doing what we need to do, whether it's for the team or an individual player. But we set those expectations and how we behave. I think behaviours is a massive thing within the game, and how you behave as a coach then goes on how your players behave.
I did contemplate when setting up the call whether I should have found an Irishman to join us on the call to cover the United Kingdom as such.
Although my family is from Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland, look, we're covering outside the UK as well. Look how inclusive we all are. So, it's great that you're all here. I really appreciate it. You all helped the podcast grow in so many ways. And, we've all grown individually since then. Some of us have travelled half the world and have had more holidays than work days. Some of us have been truly grafting, and some of us have had new pastures. So, it's incredible to see everyone's journey. And, I really appreciate you all being part of it, but also cropping back up and doing a full reflective circle as such. So it's really exciting to see all of you.
Yeah, likewise.
Cheers. Well, I really appreciate it. Well, the format of tonight is sort of, a bit of a round circle as such, so the reflective circle. So I might pose a question and then one of you can answer. You can debate it, or I might pose it in your way and then look at sort of a counter argument as such. We got the brains of Britain in front of me, and I feel very honoured to be hosting it when I've got so much talent in front of me, and I know how privileged I am to have met all of you, but to bring you all together is another task and enjoyment within itself. Well, so I'll go around the circle as such. So Leigh, if you want to introduce yourself, where you're at, what you're currently doing, and if anything's changed since the last time we've spoken.
Yeah, so Leigh Jeffrey, UEFA B coach. So I work in football as well as volunteering in football. So I am on a committee at a grassroots club over in Chorley in Lancashire. I oversee the under-7s, under-8s as a coach on training and match days, and then I manage the under-15s, as well as helping any of the other teams with development. I'm also at Chorley Women in the development squad in the Premiership division of the Lancashire County Women's League. And then as a job, I am a football development officer at Lancashire Football Association. So that's probably me rounded up in one.
Rounded up in one, and many hats, many experiences, and a very important person by all seems. Absolutely. Kirsty, how about yourself?
Yeah, so Kirsty McFarlane, obviously Scottish with the accent. I am community development manager at one of the clubs up here for their kind of foundation element. And yeah, the last time we spoke, I was just in the job. I'm now a year into the job. So yeah, it's going good. We've grown quite a bit up here. So yeah, it's just going as it is.
So that's grown quite a bit, obviously, because of the work that you put in over the last year.
Yeah, pretty much. It was when I took over, it was kind of at its lowest. Kind of only had 2 things going, and now the full week is full of schools and sessions and everything. It's a busy time.
Absolutely, for sure. So we got a bit of a grassroots background in Leigh and what you're doing. We got a bit of a community project side with what you're doing as well, Kirsty. And also you got other experiences, but just covering the grass was it of it across everyone. And then we got Georgia, who is on the pod as well.
Yeah, so Georgia Smethurst. My day job just as a sports lecturer. I work with the FA as a coach developer and community champion, so supporting specifically female coaches, so females getting into coaching with that role. And then since speaking to you last time, I took on a role with Carlisle United with their ETC as the player development lead and under-16s coach. I've since then also tore my ACL, so I've temporarily stopped playing, and now help sort of play a coach with the team I play in the Northwest Regional League.
Well, some great news and some disappointing news, but I hope the recovery is going well and that you're doing all right from it.
Yeah, it's my second one, and it's the opposite leg this time, so at least I'll have equally weak hamstrings.
There you are. Look, you balanced out in one way or the other. You're all right. But that is a big sort of consideration in the female game, is that ACL and how often it's happening. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see what data comes from that over the next few years. And, as much as it's a shame for, female players to endure and grow through that, unless they do go through it, which they are, then, how are we going to overcome and support female players in the game and, develop that and understand it a bit more. So, we've also got the education background in Georgia, which is really interesting. And Leigh and Georgia, you're actually not too far from each other in that real contrast of things.
No, it's strange because one's so close. Actually, it's normally people are hours away from me.
Absolutely. Well, you could sort of start in Wales up with me, go to Georgia with Leigh, and then you can end up in Scotland. So you got the perfect coaching route right throughout Britain, right there. And you might then pick out which are the best clubs you might want to go to, or what areas to avoid on your way through. That's probably going to be Wales, by the way. So, it's good that we got that combination. So, it's a great pathway to understand what we can do in community, how we can combine that with grassroots, and then how that education looks across the game. But I'm going to pose the first question to you, Georgia, because this interlinks with what you do in terms of coach education and that background in terms of lecturing. But how do you develop reflective practice in your teams, clubs, and programs?
I think initially you've got to highlight the importance of it, because a lot of people think it's a tick box exercise, don't they? I know when I've been on courses myself and there's that reflective box at the end of the session plan and you kind of eye roll a little bit, but when you start to understand the importance and you see the benefits and things like that, then it sort of comes more naturally.
And Leigh, do you do anything in addition to that, or anything different that might oppose Georgia or complement the great work that she does?
Yeah, I think you've got to reflect constantly. I think I didn't realise the importance until my B licence, that how much it impacts you going forward. But I oversee the under-7s and 8s on their match day, and we've started to really dive into the detail of how we expect them to perform. Are they where we want them to be? Are they involved? How much playing time are they getting? so we can monitor that over the season, but also have those important conversations at the foundation phase. Are we seeing the development that we're having at training going to a match day? Do we need to add further support in the training? And if someone is overachieving, does it get to a point where we need to move them on to support that individual within a grassroots level? So although it's starting at under sevens, it is really having that impact on. We have the data, we can support the growth and development and reflect on the match day, but we can also see that going into a training and they kind of nicely interlink with each other.
That's very interesting in terms of itself, because you're looking at the detail and how much you might give them, in a case it might be detrimental if you're overloading them in that sense. You're reviewing the development of players, you're looking at that further support, which is always a consideration in that self. And I love what you say about overachieving and how you can then further support them or move them on in a certain way. What would you determine or call an overachiever, and how do you look at that as a whole?
I think we see where the team are at and those that naturally stand out or naturally taken over the game as such. We've experienced it with a couple of players in the number of teams over the last few years, under sevens and eights. And there's the individual player that kind of takes over the team in what sounds like a harsh way, but we'll drop back and defend, we'll get the ball and run all the way and score a goal. And it kind of becomes their show, and you start to think, well, the other players aren't involved in the game. Now that's now impacting their development. As a team, where are we at? And we want everyone to be involved. Yes, at under sevens, we want to see them all about the individual. Then at under eights, we'll start to look at more positions and them as a team. But when you see someone just do everything week in, week out, you start to think, how much football are the other players getting? So we would never say to someone, look, we're getting rid of you as such. We'll do it in the right way. If they want to stay within the team, that's absolutely fine. But then it might be we might monitor their playing time, but we would do the right thing for the individuals. And the same if we've not got anyone, if to us they're not where we want them to be or how we would expect, we would drop them back into training and say, look, we're not taking away that playing opportunity. Keep training. Let's see what you're learning in training, take it into match days. And then we're also getting the development both ways.
I love that, and this again, that's such a great reflection upon what you're doing, but also interesting how that further develops to move on those players, and leads into a very nice question that I got posed to bring your way and opens up the conversation, which is fantastic. But before I do, Kirsty, back to that question about reflection. Do you do anything that complements the girls, or is it anything that you oppose, which may be a little bit different up in Scotland?
No, I mean, we do kind of pretty similar. We have as a disadvantage up here that our girls' pathways are 2 years compared to down south. You obviously go by year. So sometimes we've got girls that are maybe standing out a little bit more, but to move them up, it's like a massive jump because you're going from maybe like under 10 right up to under 12. And sometimes when you're in under 12, obviously if you're a January born, and if you're maybe a 9-year-old who's a December born, there's obviously a big kind of physical difference. So it's maybe a wee bit more hard up here to try and reflect in that sense, because you almost don't want to put them in to a situation where they could get hurt just because of physical difference rather than ability difference. But it's pretty much kind of similar to obviously what the girls have said. We just have that slight kind of hurdle because of the difference.
And, it's definitely an interesting contrast, because you're looking at those 2 year gaps, as you said. And I've worked with females over here in Wales, and what you might find is that we don't have every age group for girls in terms of the engagement that we have. So typically we might have under 13s, we might miss that under 14s and have under 15s. So when you look at girls stepping up to play under 15s or covering or rotating in, for example, it's quite a big leap in terms of that physical stature that's involved. And as much as they might stand out at under 13 level, they then might struggle at under 15s. But some slot in naturally nice and straight away because they're excelling at under 13s, and it's great for them to have that physical development being pushed and challenged, and stepping up to play with older age groups to understand the tactical demands of the game, pitch geography, how to interlink with styles of play, and really stepping up that knowledge and education that comes with it. And when it comes back round, go on Georgia, go ahead, sorry.
I think sometimes the struggle's good, isn't it? They don't have to excel. I mean, they're playing with people potentially 2 years older than them and 2 years bigger than them. That they should struggle and they should feel it if they've been sort of a big fish in a small pond for so long. It'll develop them more than just physically and technically.
What a true educator answer right there, and I love that because, you know, we might look at it and we might go, yeah, this player's growing, yeah, we've seen them develop, yeah, they've stepped up their game, yeah, we've moved them up an age group, and, you know, realistically, they've had all these tick boxes, so it's looking, you know, perfect on paper, but realistically, if they're struggling, is that a tick box within itself? Because how do you develop the knowledge, how do you develop the reflective practice, and how do you evaluate their technical ability so they can step up into those elements of the game? So when they do, you know, go into seniors football, you know, players are always grouped then at those ages, but when they're 18, they're going on a pitch with a 25-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, and so on. And, you know, they have to be in that position to understand they're going to be playing, you know, experienced players, more physicality, etc., and everything else that goes with it. So when it comes back round to it then, Leigh, when it comes down to saying, you know, pitching players in a squad, do you believe in a tiered system such as an A team, a B team and a C team in terms of then rising from a technical level to least technical to most technical and progressing players up and down the ranks in terms of how you would maybe structure a team within itself?
So when I first started out my coaching journey, my teams that I came into was tiered as an A and a B team, and it caused nothing but problems. It caused friction within the parents, friction within the players. They weren't playing with the friends were in one team, they were in another team. And why take a player from being with their friends if that's what they enjoy? Why can't we have a mixed environment and develop as a team and not individuals? Especially within a club environment, you don't want to cause that friction of having an A team and a B team. I believe when you go into the open age team environment, then you've got your first team, your reserve team, your development team. I see the pathway there at Chorley, and we have a great pathway, and it works, and we've seen the development works. But I definitely think in your junior football, there's no need to have your A team and your B team. Keep them together, let them enjoy the football, because when they go into open age might not be for them, and that might be the end of the junior journey and the football journey. So keep them enjoying it. Then when they go to an open age environment, it's the right time to be challenged and pushed. And if them going into a first team or a reserve team and having the opportunity to go and push themselves forward is the right for them, and that's the right for the individual. But I'm all about going about what you enjoy, and if that's what the individual enjoys and that's where they're thriving and they're happy, then why should we take them out of that environment?
I think that's a great answer within itself, and again, so many considerations. And you know, when it comes down to it, you're looking at players remaining within the game and having that enjoyment from it, but also when they have the opportunity, the scope to remain with those that they enjoy playing with. And you know, when they enjoy playing with the players and maybe the more technical players, these technical players could bring them along a lot more within training. But then if they're, you know, having friends who are then training away from them or in different groups, then they might not enjoy the purpose of the training session, which is what we see across all of our sessions at grassroots, and maybe what Kirsty does in the community in trying to signpost players and connect them from communities into club. Then realistically they've gone in, oh, my friend plays, and then you take their friend away, and then therefore that participation decreases, and then that's where the work of Kirsty goes in and has to do that. So, you know, it's definitely an interesting scope about how we do that. But you know, within that, there's an education, a psychological element which can play into contrast, Georgia.
Yeah, I think just sticking with the grassroots version, it depends what they're there for. Like, I mean, personally, I would never have an A-B team in grassroots at that sort of age. I agree with Leigh in the open age. I think that's very different because the reasons for playing them may be different. But as a kid, you could have an excellent player and a player that's not sort of nowhere near as good, but their reasons for playing might just be because they're best mates and they want to play together. So why should they be split up? You should just differentiate it and make sure they're both challenged appropriately and they're not struggling, and well, not struggling in a bad sense after what I've just said. But yeah, I think it's appropriate to keep them together. It's good to have a mix.
And there's an important word in there, and that's differentiate, and I'll come back to that one for sure. But when it comes down to different groups and, you know, looking at individuals that come through, they all got different personalities, they all got different needs and wants. And obviously you get those who may be seen as, you know, the winners and the ones who want to push themselves more. So, you know, the ones who want to go and score the goals, the one who want to get the most out of training, the ones who can't, you know, deal with losing, the ones who want to be in the cups and, you know, pushing themselves in those levels because they want to be seen as winners. But when it comes down to it, you know, we have different personalities, those who might be there there recreationally, those who want to be seen as winners, those who don't mind development, and then we get the others who are pushed into it maybe because of their parents and families, etc. But when it comes down to these different personalities and trying to group them together and, you know, trying to keep a team together and that combination of unity, how do you manage the different personalities within your team, Kirsty?
I think it would just be obviously seeing what personalities you've got, how they work together, and how best you can get them to work with your team, as in like coaching staff and the other players. Obviously, you might have people that are completely opposites in terms of their personality, but everybody's love for the game is what brings them together. So how can you use football to make the team dynamic work and everybody gets on? They're all there for the one game. They're all there to play football, enjoy themselves playing football. So it's getting the love for the game and the enjoyment of the game to make all these personalities click and work together, because 9 times out of 10 the kids are there because they want to be there. They want to play football. They want to play with their friends or maybe play with new friends. There's loads of different sort of aspects of the game itself. So using that and the kids' passion of that to work all together is probably the best sort of pinpoint, because what might work for one personality might not work for another personality in terms of maybe like the way you coach or whatever. So it's kind of that dynamic of everybody loves the game, so how can we make the game work for person A to person B?
I really love that, and there's so many quotes which we're going to pitch away. But Georgia, I think you were going to say something there.
Yeah, it's like getting them to understand, like they're all there for the same reason, like Kirsty said, but getting them to understand that people are different. You know, there was a coach on a workshop that I ran last week, and she was talking about an autistic boy in one of her teams and how she was actually on an event about a year ago, and she was telling the group about how the rest of the team was struggling with him socially, and then sort of a year on, she's now talking about how it's brought on the rest of the team socially, and the individual that was autistic or that is autistic. So that they learn the relationships and the different relationships that they'll have, because even as adults they'll have those relationships with people that don't necessarily or interact in the exact same way. I mean, we all probably interact in different ways, and it's about them learning that as well.
I think that's such an important point in terms of itself. So, you know, that inclusivity, which includes players and ensuring it. But you make a great point there, how it can bring on the ASD child, for example, and support them in terms of that social and that understanding. Because, you know, many kids where they might be in a social education and have been impacted by COVID, or they're taken out of it because we look at differentiation. So, you know, we might remove kids and have interventions, or we might look at smaller groups, but are they then really learning from their environment around them? And therefore, are they being impacted by not understanding what the social cues are, not understanding, you know, taking turns, or, you know, how to integrate with others, or socialization. So I think you make a great point there in terms of that, Georgia. And as a coach educator then, how do you support clubs and coaches in terms of being more inclusive in terms of the work that you do with the clubs, in terms of the programs that you do?
I think it's more developing an awareness from their behalf of there really isn't that much of a difference, and it's not a big effort and things that you've got to change to accommodate everybody. Like subtle changes would mean the world to some individuals, and it's just kind of getting that point across. I think in this example with the workshop, it helped that someone there had someone in their group like that and could kind of echo what I was saying.
And I love that, and I think that's really important in terms of itself. And when it comes down to the work that you do, Leigh, how do you ensure that teams are inclusive, but that they're also providing equal opportunities whilst balancing the players across the team in terms of those personalities?
I think for us, and within my role as football development officer, we have 3 key pathways, which are male pathway, female pathway, and disability pathway. Not every club has the opportunity and has the availability to grow and have all 3 pathways. For my club, we're a 17 boys club. Well, we're a mixed team, we've got 1 girl within the club, but mainly fall into the male pathway. And we don't have room to grow, and I would love to have a female pathway. I'd love to have a disability pathway to echo what I echo to clubs and try and develop within my day job. But as a club, we don't have the availability to do that. So as me as a football development officer, as a club like mine, I'm looking at how can we make you sustainable and how can we make sure that you're still here in 20 years' time and you've got the coaches involved, you're sustainable as a club and you've got all the infrastructure that we need, whether it's facilities, courses, just that on-pitch, off-pitch support. But then we do have clubs out there that want to grow, have the opportunities to grow, they have the facilities, they have the coaches there, and we'll go and support them, whether it's through a recreational programme, whether it's then they want affiliated teams, do they want to develop a new league, is that what, if that's their interest, we'll go and support that, whatever their needs are. But whether it's growth or sustainability, we're there to support, and whichever pathway that is, but we want to make sure whichever pathway they fall within, that it is a safe, inclusive environment and anyone in their club is treated as equals.
And I love that, and I think that's so interesting because that actually relates to a lot of work that you're doing, Kirsty, in terms of, you know, making that sustainable and creating pathways and looking at how that grows. So is there anything that you do that complements the work that Leigh would do up in Scotland, and how this may be slightly different, or maybe what you're doing which is similar to what Leigh is doing?
Yeah, so we're kind of a similar situation where we currently don't have a home ground as a first team. So a lot of the programmes that we run, we're dependent on other venues. So we, again, the same, we would love to have a female pathway and other pathways, but we physically at the minute can't, just because of no home ground. So we have to source other venues, and unfortunately the price of venues up here is crazy, to put it nicely. So for us to be sustainable in that sense, we just can't, because we would just be too much on pitches. So what we try to do is we try and kind of include other programmes. So we work in partnership with active schools up here, which is the kind of primary schools, and we run like girls sessions with them, and then we work with local halls and we do like mini kickers sessions, and we try and just build like avenues that we could then maybe link up to another club who maybe have a successful pathway. So the girls, for example, we at the minute don't have an opportunity to do a girls pathway, but we can do the class. So if we do the class, can we then link with a successful girls pathway club, and we would just be a feeder basically, so that we are still helping the girls on the game grow, but they're getting the chance to then kind of go through a pathway to get to maybe like a first team, where we can't give them that opportunity.
And you know, I completely understand. So whereas on my screen it's me and you at the bottom, Kirsty, and Leigh and Georgia are above us, realistically we're both in the same sort of position in terms of Wales and Scotland, that we don't have the facilities or the game which the girls above have in England, whereby the game is very successful, and there's a lot more ahead of us in terms of Scotland and Wales. And you know, that's coming from an outsider point of view, because you know, the programme in England is a lot more bigger, and it's growing because of that sustainability and the amount of clubs which do exist. But you know, that sustainability does come into play regardless of how successful, you know, the programmes are, especially in terms of the Premier League downwards, and what we're seeing in terms of Scotland and Wales. So it's definitely going to be interesting, as I said along our conversation before, is how interesting it'll be whether Wales and Scotland catch up to England and how that looks across the board. But to ring road back round, you know, that great conversation around ASD and inclusiveness, which then took us into club development and sustainability, coach education, supporting them, you know, making those changes. How do we integrate players? You know, comes with behaviours and actions, which comes into play. So it interlinks to one of my questions, and it's as if I've prepared you lot in individual calls to sort of pitch the conversation in certain ways. So, you know, huge kudos to all of you. But Georgia, how do you manage unwanted behaviours in terms of the programmes and club that you have with all of your stakeholders? And this may include those with ASD, inclusive areas, and considerations of their needs.
I think it probably starts with knowing the players. And if you're involved in a larger program and you may be overseeing it, it's probably more the coaches themselves knowing the players, and if there's any, not reason for it, but if there's reason for it, if there's something behind that's making them act like that. But then beyond knowing the players, it comes down to the players and all those involved knowing the expectations and the standards, and whether that's at grassroots or a higher level, because the behaviour might not come from the the kids, it might come from the parents and what's the expectation of them on the sideline, and I think that's a big part of it. I think if you set the bar quite high from the off and everyone's kind of singing from the same hymn sheet, it should, fingers crossed, be okay. I know it doesn't work like that, but yeah.
And I think that leads again into such a nice question so naturally because, Leigh, how do you hold everyone accountable to those high standards which you've instilled in terms of, where you pitch the bar and setting that so high that you want everyone to sort of sing to the same tune and be acquitted to being, on that pathway towards what you want to achieve across the club and in terms of the unity?
So where we're at as a club is for the first 2 years, myself and another coach oversees the development. What we tend to find with our grassroots clubs locally is they'll have maybe a parent that comes on and takes a new under-7s team. They've had the development sessions and the under-7s get taken on by a parent. But then we're taking that parent away from enjoying their child from playing football and sitting back watching and seeing how we are as coaches. So myself and Paul, it's my 9th year of just overseeing the under-7s and 8s. It's how I got involved and took the 15s, which are now 15, so I've gone through the whole last 8 years with them. But we set the expectations, how you'll see us on a training night and how we behave, and on a match day how we behave. You won't hear us shouting and screaming like you might see the coach next to us doing. You'll see us making notes and having conversations with parents, having the honest conversations and doing what we need to do, whether it's for the team or an individual player. But we set those expectations and how we behave. I think behaviours is a massive thing within the game, and how you behave as a coach then goes on how your players behave. If you drop your standards, you allow your players to drop your standards. If you keep the high standards, you keep that expectation. I know going into under 15s now, behaviours have started to change. And it's getting a little bit more feisty with the other teams. But I know my team know if they was to drop to their level, that I'd have a problem and I'd probably have them off the pitch quicker than a referee would have them off the pitch, because that's not what I expect as a coach. But I think with the younger ones, we allow parents to see us and how we behave for 2 years, then we pass them on at under 9s. We set that real community family feel within the club environment, and we have those expectations. And if a manager that takes the teams on doesn't install our standards and what we expect as a club, but that's a conversation we need to have. And it has happened that we have let a full team go to another club because for us, the manager and the coaching team wasn't going to our club standards. And if one team's going to bring a whole club down, that's not what we want as a club. We have our standards, and we have been around a long time. We're going to our 25th year, and we want to keep our standards high and be that nice family community club.
I love that, and I think you're doing such great work, and there's a couple of points within that. So one of them today was I was working with a couple of young students, and one of them said, "Sir, well, I want you to shout at her the way that you would shout at the players in your team." And I said to him, "I've never shouted at a player in my team, so I'm not going to shout at her." So I think that just shows in terms of the expectations that I uphold, but it doesn't have to come down to shouting to warrant unwanted behaviours, and how you deal with that as well. Now I think it's good that you talk about that accountability and having players off quicker than the referee would have them off. And when it comes down to making those decisions and really pitching the high standards for your players, do you sort of have comebacks from the stakeholders, which may include parents and carers, in terms of their responses to bringing those players off quicker than maybe where their expectations may be, and their expectations not being as high as yours, for example?
I think, thankfully, over the last 9 seasons, I've not had to really intervene, because I do have a couple of individual players that maybe lose their heads at times, and they know themselves, and we'll just take them off. But they're the first to apologise, because they know they've not upset themselves. They're more bothered that they've upset me and Dan on the sideline, and that's what bothers them. So I think I'm lucky that I have a really good set of parents, really supportive on a match day. We're always happy to have a conversation of what we're thinking. They tend to think along the same lines of what we're thinking. Majority of my team have been with me since under 7s. A lot of them got the long service award at the end of last season. So I'm lucky they've come on the journey with me. And as a team, we are we keep our standards high. But if there is anyone that does overstep the line, I think they know straight away that it's not acceptable. And I think players start when new players come in, and we try to say like, look, your language, how you speak to each other, how you work within a team. We have these standards. I wouldn't want to go into work on a Monday morning to a red or yellow card. That puts me in a bad light as a manager. So I think they understand where I'm at, and I think they respect that as a manager.
Again, I really love that, and I think that's a little thought that I've had there. Imagine working in like a sports industry such as a community project or working for a club, and then they started to introduce, a policy or system whereby you might receive yellow and red cards across the course of a week or month or across that a year as an employee if you weren't to do something. But that's in consideration to pitching the play. But I love that you also talk about that isn't something that you'd want to receive, so why should your players want to receive it? So I think that gives a good analogy in terms of that coach-player relationship. And when it comes down to it then, Kirsty, do you think it's more about rules or is it more about expectations and guidelines in terms of how you may approach this in terms of a programme?
I think it's a kind of combination of both. Obviously, your players have got to know what you expect of them and also a little bit of what they expect of you. So obviously, they expect you to be the mentor, to be the leader. So you've got to obviously uphold yourself to that standard because, like as Leigh said, the minute you slip, that has an effect on your players. So if, for example, you shouted at your players, that's maybe not within you and it's maybe a heat of the moment, but that then affects your players because your players are maybe like reacting to what you've done. But also you've obviously got to have kind of rules and guidelines to say this is what we expect. These are kind of the guidelines of where our club's at, what our club follows, what our club kind of beliefs are. So it's probably a wee combination of both and a kind of mutual respect of this is what I expect as a coach from your players and this is what the players expect of me to be the leader, be the mentor and not be this big bad shouting machine.
I think that's really important as well, not to be the shouting machine because you can be seen in terms of not being someone who could be then approached or breaking down that relationship, especially for someone who may have an additional learning need, which has been inclusive part of your program or club and has come on board, etc. But when you talk about those expectations and what do you expect then, what is it that you instill or what is it that you bring or have around you where you have these expectations? What are they and what do they look like?
I think it would just be obviously you expect everybody to be welcoming, be friendly, because like Leigh said, sometimes if you're introducing a new player, it can be quite daunting, especially if you've got players that have been together for 5, 6 years. They'll all know each other, they'll all be obviously friends, so your expectations of your players is to be welcoming and be friendly so that this player can come in and they can join and they can enjoy themselves playing football and it's not the daunting of I'm not in the team because they've known each other for years. And then obviously as a coach you've got to keep that standard of you need to welcome them in as well and make sure that they are supported and they're feeling okay and rather than just be like, all right, welcome to the team and then just kind of leave them be. But yeah, there's loads of different ones and again it just depends on your team and your players and your personalities because what might work for like one team might not work for another team or what might work for one kid might not work for another kid. So your expectations have got to be open because they've got to suit all your players and where your club's at.
I think that's brilliant in terms of how you bring that across as well. And when it comes down to integrating players and making them feel a part of a team, it can be hard to overcome those barriers, and that's comes down to the importance of the work of all of you. But it is quite daunting to walk into a new team, or especially looking at those who've known each other for years and trying to fit in part of that, and it's not always the easiest thing to do. So I've just got back into playing snooker, so I've gone into a snooker club, a little bit different from football. It's a little bit more individualistic, but it's sort of nice because I can integrate myself in, but you sort of hear everyone around the club who know each other, so I can understand in terms of what you're saying how that comes. But when you see 10 to 15 footballers in front of you, they got a ball each, they're chatting, it can be quite a daunting experience and environment to go into. And when it comes down to integrating players then, Georgia, how do you integrate players? Do you buddy them up? Do you create a system? Is there sort of work around what you might do as a coach to get them in? How does that sort of look when you have a new player joining your club or program, for example?
think from maybe the start of the session when they arrive, if you know they're coming, you've got in your head someone that you know is already like the social butterfly in the group that'll talk the ear off anybody. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing putting them with them, but at least someone's talking to them for a start. So buddy them up with them just for maybe the first activity, and maybe design your practice to involve a lot more of a social aspect than technical, and because they might be worried about how they perform compared to everyone else because they've never seen them play. So it might have more of a social, fun focus, a lot more teamwork involved, just to kind of get them sharing and chatting and things like that. Maybe even small group activities, 2v2s, 3v3s. I mean, at least they've left the session, they definitely know 2 or 3 other people that they can then start the session with the next week.
I think that's really important as well, and I love that you talk about game design and how that looks, because typically on a bit of paper you might get in front of you now and I might say, right, plan a session, girls, and then we'll chat about it at the end. So you might start off with your arrival activity, your indoor warm-up, bit of a technical SSG, then we might look at the components throughout in terms of that technical information which we're delivering, but we might not always consider the social aspect in terms of that. So when you might look at a typical session plan, they might have those areas, but you might never see a box for social integration or social interaction. So I think that's a really important consideration in terms of that. And when it comes into this, and sort of table tennis, the ball across the table, Leigh, on your side, so I'm going to pitch that to you. How do you ensure the social interaction of your players across your sessions, and even when you're not conscious of planning that in, how that may look in terms of your delivery on the pitch, then in terms of your own personality?
I think allowing players to have the time to socialise with each other. I think if you start a session and straight away you've got a session plan, you might only have your players for an hour and you want to crack on and you want to fit everything in, you might go a little bit too structured where you lose that social aspect. So for us, we always give the players 5-10 minutes before a session, especially the older players. We might send them for a jog around the pitch together, but we make sure it's together. It's not, right, if you can go the fastest, off you go. Can you stick together? And you'll see them chatting, messing around, having a bit of a laugh with each other. Then when they're warming up, we allow them to have the time, go and do your stretches on yourself, take the responsibility. Now they're getting that little bit older. Have that bit of that chattiness within you. Then we tend to have a warm-up that still has that interaction with the other players. Then when we're going into the main session, now we're ready to crack on. Now it's, right, we still have that fun, we'll still have that social element, but I want you to listen that little bit more now. I want you to, we're ready to learn. But you've given players that time. And I think when you go to the end of a session, can you make sure they're still with their friends? If you're going into a game at the end, if you have done a lot, if we've done a playing out from the back session and we're attack versus defence, we might mix the teams up again at the end. Being with other players is helpful, getting them to speak to other players, socialising with others. But I think you've got to allow players that time to socialise with each other. Especially now, especially when they're older, they're all going to different schools, they all have different backgrounds. And with the boys team I have now at 15s, they're all playing against each other at schools now. They want to know the tactics of each other's teams. They want to know how the other results are going against other teams. It's just allowing players that time to go and socialise and knowing when the right time is to crack on and it's ready to go.
I think that again, that you bring up so many considerations in terms of that as you highlight what the work is that you do. And when it comes down to it, it relates again nicely to what Kirsty has said. And I was going to talk about in terms of having multiple hats, because she spoke about being a leader, a mentor, and within that we're coaches, and then we're becoming a social pathway to creating these players an opportunity and bringing them together. But then when you also talk about structured and unstructured sessions, so then we're playing in sort of two kind of hats then, because we're looking at the coach who's going to be very structured and very rigid in their approach, and someone who might be a little bit more fluid and then allow for those times. And I feel there's a real combination and that balance in between both, where the scales might tip one way one week and one way the other, but as long as we have our principles and values in the middle, then we're going to be very successful in doing so. Because the moment we pitch the scales too far and they start to move up and we're on the bottom here, I feel that we're going to have less success than if we're trying to tip them in both ways. But when it comes down to it then, Kirsty, as someone who works in the community yourself and pitching round down to you because of this big community background that you have. There is an importance for structured and unstructured times, and it's really important to have both. But when it comes down to having an unstructured mindset or delivering this as such, do you feel that there is a big importance to try and grasp a lot of unstructured time, or again it's more about more structured than a little bit less, or finding that right balance?
I think it's all about finding the right balance. Like as Leigh said, it's sometimes you'll draw up a plan and you want to hit all the points, but then if you do maybe have a new player coming down, you want to sort of have that unstructured part where they can spend maybe 5 minutes at the start just kicking a ball about with different people, getting to know different people. Because if you were to maybe just jump straight in to the structured part of it, you would maybe lose them, and you wouldn't maybe give them the best experience because they don't know anybody and they've not had a chance to even introduce themselves to anybody. So I think always having like a little 5-10 minutes at the start, just a bit of free play. They can go around, they can talk to each other, they can pass the ball, shoot into the goal, whatever it might be. But as long as they're together and they're kind of just chatting away to each other, it means that when you move into the more structured part, you've probably got more attention of them because they've already had their wee 5-10 minutes and now they're ready to actually go into working on whatever your structured part is. So it's finding the right balance that, as you say, you're not tipping it too far one way that you lose one end and you're not kind of vice versa.
Again, such an important consideration and point that you make in terms of refocusing those players and getting them back on board. But to pinball the ball back to you, Leigh, I should have printed out your CV or asked you for your CV to print out and have it in front of me, because you wear multiple hats in terms of all the roles that you hold and what you do across the game. And when it comes down to it, and that's been a big consideration of mine over the last few weeks, is how many hats am I realistically wearing, and do I find some hats detrimental to where I'm going? And it's a good question to sort of pose myself, but then we look at how much experience do we want and need, how much do we want to be involved, and it's certainly interesting in terms of how we want to look at the here and now and look at the future as well. And I think it's great in terms of the position that you're in, because I'm very similar in terms of I love doing a bit of this, I love doing a bit of that, I want to be involved across the board, and it's fantastic to be in that position, and I'm a huge fan of it. And this is why I wear multiple hats, because I find it very difficult to say no and not be part of things. But when it comes down to that, then do you find it hard to sort of balance your time across your commitments and what you may be seen to be, whether that be the development officer in terms of the community side of the game and structured, or whether it's like the coach and developing the tactical side of the game, or whether it's one of your other avenues which you may look at and consider? Do you find that hard to weigh up in terms of one direction to go in, and because you're balancing so many, or is it dead set you want to do something but you're enjoying the other aspects that you have?
Yeah, I think sometimes they complement each other, especially what I expect of clubs within probably my work role. I need to showcase that within myself, and I think it betters my understanding of what goes on within a club. I think it's a question that I get asked multiple times across the season. How do you do it? Why? Why? And I get bored on a Monday and a Tuesday night when nothing's going on. I'm wondering like what's going on next. I actually decided this season to go back playing because I missed the playing aspect last season and took a little bit of a step back from Trolley Women this season, but still involved in the club. The under 7s and 8s and the 15s all train on the same night, so it's not like I'm across multiple nights. But it allows me that opportunity within a work role that I can still go out and visit clubs and still go and help develop in an evening, and you're not just stuck 9 till 5. So they all nicely complement each other. I think it's nice to balance from one hat to another and think about what I would want within a work role from a coach, or what, as a coach in a club, what would I expect someone within my role at a county. But I love it. I wouldn't have it any other way. It keeps me busy, but it's also a nice position to be in. And I think my previous role was within at Burnley FC in the community, working within primary schools, and I think that just helps my knowledge and complement what I do and puts me in a better position now.
For sure, and you can see that, and it's that great growth. But Georgia, over to you.
Yeah, just I think doing so much, or people might see it as spread yourself so thin, gives you a better perspective on other people's point of view. So if I was going to go work with another coach and they're in a setting that works with 18-month to 3-year-olds. I mean, I haven't done that for a long time, but I've done it before. Like, and Leigh, you might think from, say, like a county FA perspective, you could bring things from your experiences in grassroots, but you might work with people at the county FA that haven't got as much experience in grassroots or current grassroots. And like you said, they do complement each other and give you a better perspective on not what's actually happening, but more of an awareness to other people's point of view and experience.
And I think it helps when you're going working with a club, and you might find it in your women and girls champion role that when you come from someone here, so you work for a county FA, well, do you work in football? It's always a question that I don't know what's happening on a grass pitch, and actually I'm heavily experienced. I've worked across multiple age groups from under 7s to open age football, and I want to use my experiences to help. And I think the conversations within the office help each other. There's multiple people that work across different age groups within the game that work at the county fair, and we all help each other. And our knowledge of the game only betters our roles, that then betters football on the pitch going forward.
Yeah, I think some people or some coaches maybe look at it as the higher or more qualified you get, the further away you are from the grassroots game and the problems that they have. But the reality is that you're still definitely involved in it, and it's the problems are the same, whatever sort of stage you're at.
Everyone's always like, "Are you doing your licence next?" And I'm like, no, I'm quite happy. I would coach 7s and 8s for the rest of my life because I love the environment. I thrive on a Thursday. Although I love the other age groups, I think I just like that relaxed environment where they're more bothered whether I've got Haribo's at the end of a game than actually what's going on a pitch.
And I think that's what I was alluding to in terms of, that different enjoyment of environments, because, you might go and coach your under 15s and be very tactical and be like, do you know what, I loved working on breaking the lines and switching play this week. But then you might be with your 7s and 8s on the weekend and be like, oh, I love seeing the enjoyment of, them seeing a build-up play and scoring a 1-2 in a small goal, or, seeing a players, develop from, say, a midfielder into a pacey winger, for example. And it's that nice balancing and seeing what's different and really enjoying and that consideration. And I think that's a really important contrast. But it was great to see the coach developer pitch in before I was able to ask the question, because again, it's as if you've read my mind and came in and give us a masterclass in coach education from what you're doing.
Too kind.
No problems at all. And just to build upon that and where we're at in terms of, that consideration of the multiple hats that we wear, do you think, as an educator yourself and being a part of that, to sort of get coaches to sort of look at the here and now and to stop overthinking and maybe stop overanalyzing, which I find the most impossible task to do. When it comes down to it, how do you support coaches into, focusing and enjoying the here and now, but, ensuring that they're maximising every opportunity, as Leigh has, to, enjoy here and now, to look at the future and to try and prosper in the aspects that they want to grow and go within?
Yeah, I think I'm working with a coach at the minute and also a couple of students on one of the courses that I'm running. And the worry about the session and what it looks like and how it's gone. And the first thing that they say when they reflect with you about is something negative. And I think it's just constantly reminding them that the 6-year-old really isn't going to know about that comb that you forgot to put down over there, or they're more bothered about how you engage with them than maybe what your practice is that night. If you make it fun and engaging, they're probably not going to realise that you've forgot the third step on your plan and it didn't quite link as you wanted it to.
And I think that relates to what you're doing, Kirsty, because, you've got the KMC coaching, which is always very prosperous, but that's a lot of technical coaching. You get to work with players on that one-to-one basis in small groups. But then, by day, you're working in terms of that community aspect and working with clubs and growing that. And that can be very different because you're looking at sustainability, planning, growth, development of coaches, linking things up, partnerships, and so on. So that can be very different to moving away from one-to-one coaching, small groups, technical ability, etc. And when it comes down to it, some days days you might go out on a pitch after a Monday night and go, do you know what, I actually love moving the board tonight, and it was a great balance between the day of, you know, sitting down in different meetings and looking at strategy to then actually doing that technical work. And other days you might go, do you know what, I prefer being in the office tonight because I don't think the session went as well as I wanted it to do last night. Because as coaches ourselves, we find it very hard to switch off from reflection, and we can be as critical on ourselves as we are on our players. But when it comes down to it, do you find it as a nice balance, Kirsty, or do you find that your skills might tip more in one direction over a period of time towards what your outlook on the future may be in terms of being a technical development coach, or looking at whether it's more strategies and management in terms of how you may look at operations in terms of your outlook from yourself?
I think, to be fair, my like own one-to-one coaching, I don't see it as coaching. I see it as just like a hobby. Like, it's a nice break from the day-to-day work. Because when I initially started it, it was just I wasn't in a good place, and it was like my escape. It was a place where for that 1 hour I have that kid, my mind is just on football. Like, it's not on anything else. Like, it was more of an escape for me that then turned into a really enjoyable hobby as such. But then the role I'm in now is just so vast in terms of programs we have that it kind of played into itself a little bit, because a lot of the kids I work with now are of grassroots ages. So although they're all maybe slightly years apart, they're all pretty similar. They've all got the same aim. They all want to just be out enjoying their football and developing and getting better. And then during the day, I do like classes that are like 24-year-olds, and then the next hour it's over 60s. So there's such a vast group that's actually helped me develop as a coach, because obviously what you do with a 24-year-old to what you do with a technical grassroots player to an over 60 is completely different. So it's actually benefited me in learning to be the best coach for the age group I'm working with, because like this morning, for example, I was running about pretending I was an aeroplane, and then obviously tonight, had I not had this, I would have been out doing a technical session with a grassroots girl. So it's just like the difference in learning how best to adapt your coaching style and your personality to deal with your age group. Because if I had turned up tonight and said, right, let's run about as if we're aeroplanes, they would have just looked at me like, what? Whereas the kids this morning absolutely loved it. They all went away with a smile on their face, pretending they were a pilot. So it's just a massive difference, but it helps you develop because you've got so many different groups and people and ages and abilities.
I love hearing how people's days go and how different their days are. So, you know, when I was sitting in the classroom this morning, I love the fact that you were running around making airplane noises and really engaging with the kids. So I love that sort of stimuli as well. And it's great because you
never got sacked if I ran around and pretended to be an airplane.
Proper coach.
Might try it tomorrow.
Coach development for you at your finest. This is what you all do. Ignore the balls and cones. Just run around making noises at the kids.
Yeah.
Spot on. But I think that's a fantastic answer, Kirsty. And you know, we'll send the job offer later on in the post, and you know, you've secured the job. So fantastic answer in terms of that. But I love the fact that you say it's a hobby more than you know, something that you see as something that you have to 100% plan on or really get around to, because you can have that enjoyment and really work with the players and seeing that development. And it's great that you have that. And, you know, I again, relating to what you say earlier, as I've got you here, you know, we talk about leadership, we talk about mentors, and that relates to our multiple hats. And, you know, George, you may have done some work around leadership, especially as a coach educator. And we talk about different styles of leadership and how that may play in contrast. So, you know, one of my biggest considerations at the moment is, are we servant leaders or are we quiet leaders? So, you know, the servant leader is someone who understands that big noises are not as important as big hearts, but that noise is noise and it doesn't count for anything, and therefore the quieter voice of purpose is the voice that is caring and the one that matters. So that servant leadership is how we're serving others, how we're pitching our sessions. So in that respect, Kirsty, you're very much a servant leader because you're detailing your sessions and your response to the players that you have. So by running around as an aeroplane, you're meeting their needs and therefore they're enjoying it even more. Whereas Leigh might be observing that as a quieter leader and going, well, actually they could benefit from having a bit more of a structured session session and doing this. And this is where it's at in terms of those different types of leadership that we have, how someone may pitch their views on a session, and hence where the reflective circle has come from, to create this contrast and not to put anyone on the spot and go, by the way, Kirsty, I don't think that's good, stop doing that. Because it provides that contrast to those who are listening to go, do you know what, I actually love what you're doing. I never thought about doing that. And hence where this education pathway is coming from, and they're getting an FA workshop for free. But in terms of that, though, Georgia, in terms of those leadership styles and how that may play across, do you think it's important to be critically analysing our positions as leaders and our position that we serve in terms of our roles as coaches and where we may be in terms of leading upon sessions and programmes?
Sorry, it broke up a little bit there. What was the end of that?
So in terms of being a leader, do you think we have to critically analyse where we're at in terms of coaches, in terms of leading or delivering sessions, whereby we have to analyse our position as a leader, whether it be a servant leader, a quiet leader, or any other type of leader? And do you think that's important for us to really have that critical analysis of where we're at?
Yeah, I think you've got to sort of be reflexive on how you come across. Like Kirsty said before, depending on the group that you're with, maybe not necessarily herring around like an airplane, but if she was going to that over 60 session and talking in one way or talking about certain things, or approaching how she delivers the session in one way, the same way that she would the over 60s, it's not going to be effective. It's not going to be as well received. I feel like not reflecting on how you're coming across in that respect, and sort of detrimental to what you're trying to do.
And I think that's, again, relates so nicely to a question which I have prepared, and I'll pitch it to Leigh. So how do you think you're seen as a coach and as a person to your players and groups that you work with? And in response to what Georgia has said in terms of analysing who we're at and where we're sort of pitching ourselves.
I think you've got to be approachable. I know every one of my players would know that if they had a question and their voice is okay to be heard, and that it's not just me against them. We're a team and we do it together, and we're on a journey together. They're not just on my coaching journey and I'm on their playing journey. We're as a team and we're going through it together. I think you've got to reflect as a coach and know what you're doing and how you can impact them. I think we touched on it before, and like how you change from one session to another. And I think you've got to understand as a coach when enough's enough, or when you've developed as much as you can, or a team deserves your commitment. So taking a step back from Chorley was a big thing that a decision I had to make, but it was right for me and it was right for the players, because they deserve someone that could be there week in, week out, could be there on a match day. And with my other coaching commitments changing, I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't be there on training. And it wasn't fair on the other coaches that I started turning up on a match day and started chipping in with my information, when actually what they were saying on a Thursday might be different to a Sunday. So I think as a coach, you've got to be approachable. You've got to be there to have open and honest conversations. Know that not every conversation is going to be a nice conversation, but know that if you set your environment right, that your players can approach you, you can have conversations. And I think it's just those expectations. I think with the 15s, we had a player leave the other week, and I know there'll be conversations going around within the team, but you've got to nip them in the bud and say, right, this is where we're at. Don't think because one player's leaving that there's massive issues or there's things going on. Understand what's happening, and this is how we're going to move forward. This is how it impacts you as a team. It might benefit you in some ways, it might not benefit in other ways, but actually we've gone from 17 players that I have to drop one of you each week and we can't all go. So it kind of breaks up the team in that aspect, that we're not all together. Where now we've lost a player, we've got to spin a positive on it. Yes, we wish them well, and it gets to a point at under 15s that football isn't for that individual anymore and they have other interests, and that's fine. But understand that as a team now, we're together, there's 16 of us, and you've got to understand that you might be as an active player still, or as a player, how would you want your manager or coach to be? And I think you've got to reflect that within your own environment.
Again,
I think a really interesting one at the minute for me is just on you saying how the players perceive you, is with being injured and sort of stepping into a more coaching role with my team, I've coached kids, I've coached adults. I've never coached my mates. These people I go on holiday with, I go out with. So striking a balance of how they perceive me, knowing that I've coached for 10 years or something, involved in coach development, lecturing and things like that. They've got this expectation of me that normally turns up for a laugh on a Thursday night to something totally different now. And I spend most of my week focused on that session being perfect because of this expectation, because of this preconception that they've got. And I feel more pressure with that with my mates in a voluntary capacity than I do in a paid role with stakeholders and funders and things like that.
I remember stepping into the open age environment for the first time, and I remember having a conversation with someone that was an A licensed coach, who's working within a championship club, and said to me, "But Leigh, you've got to be ready. If an adult player asks you a question, you've got to answer it honestly, and it's got to be like that. You've got to know the answer. You've got to be ready." And I'm thinking, well, you're right, because with a 7 or 8 year old, they might not fully understand what you're saying anyway, so you can kind of take it back to basics. But in an open age, when it goes tactical, what we're doing, and they ask you a question, you've got to be ready to answer. And especially as teams are going up the pathway and the tiers, you've got to be ready to answer that question. And you might be asked to go and support the first team, go and support the reserves, and they might ask you a question, and you've got to be ready to go and answer that. And they're the ones that are going to catch you out if you're not ready for that. So I understand that. You put the pressure on. I would always put the pressure on a more adult-based session than a junior-based session.
I feel like I'm confident when it comes to knowing the answer, because as a player, I'd just give them the answer because I'm just a player, I'm allowed an opinion. But in a coaching capacity, you've got to tread a little bit more careful because they think that your opinion means more, but it doesn't, because I'm not the manager.
And I think as a player, you get sucked in as well. Like, I hear myself on a match day talking everyone through it, like coaching through the game. I think, Leigh, just be quiet now and just enjoy it. This is your time to enjoy playing. Just relax.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I struggled with. I couldn't enjoy playing because I just wanted to tell players where to move in positions and started coaching and realised that a player has sprinted past me and I've had to then recover the yards to go and recover the ball and stop them scoring because I'm too busy trying to watch the players around me and what they're doing. But I think that's an interesting perspective, and I love what you say, Georgia, about that position that you're seen to be within and the pressure that you have off those that you go on holiday with and that you're friends with, and when you turn up to coach them, it's very, very different. And when it comes down to that, then you've obviously had a bit of stress and anxiety around the injury which comes naturally, around coaching those players where maybe you might be anxious to coach them and how you're perceived, what your expectations are for the session. And when it comes down to that, how do you support those players in remaining grounded and seeing you in terms of that position that you are a coach, and then once the end of the session comes back around, then you can have that joke and laugh with them?
Don't struggle with that bit. Probably not appropriate for a podcast. Yeah, I don't know. I think even when I deliver something that's technical or tactical, there's still a social element to it. So, for example, we were playing against a team not long ago that had a really high number 9, but they played with 2 centre forwards, and we wanted to coach the CDM to screen more. And I think because of being friends with them already, not criticism, but more banter, sort of in the game throughout, I just commentate and joke at them all half the time. And does that mean they take me less seriously? Probably, but that's probably a good thing if they see me as this certain coach, but I want them to see me as still a player and ready for a laugh and there to enjoy it as well. I don't want to go there and bark orders, not that I'm that type of coach anyway, but I want to go for a laugh. I want them to have a laugh. I know I'd say the exact same things if I was still playing. So this time last year, I would act in the exact same way as I was, say, last Thursday, joking about the screen, not being able to screen a barn door. Yeah.
I think
keeping the enjoyment the same as I was as a player, but in a coaching capacity, still having a laugh and still showing it to that person that you were 12 months ago.
And I think I'm in a very similar position to you as an educator. So, I work in a school myself in terms of day to day. And as you might say there, you go for a laugh yourself. And some coaches might go, but you're the coach. Why would you do that? Because they want to be seen as very serious and the one delivering that information. And you're seen as the gaffer, etc. So you got to hold everyone accountable. Yes, you can do so. And very similar in terms of what I do day to day. I work with a lot of teachers. And as you can tell, teachers can be very stickler, very particular for what they want, and can be very robotic in terms of that personality. And sometimes in terms of my personality and how I am with the kids, they see the kids very happy, they see them enjoying my classroom, and responding well, whereas other teachers would want them to come in, sit behind and have those routines and expectations and there. But I'm like, but the kids are learning maybe as much, if not more than you. They're happier and they're in a position where they're enjoying it as well as me. I don't want to come in and be robotic every day and take away parts of my personality, and I don't want to take parts of their personality away. And I find that they respond very well in terms of those expectations and guidelines that I have, rather than going, right, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, these are the rules, and this is how we're going to do it. Because when you start to introduce those rules, you can take away parts of their personality and their enjoyment from it, which is a really important aspect, which really relates around the whole circle which we've had in terms of all the points that you've really made.
I think in coaching and teaching, if you haven't got that relationship, you've got nothing. Or you might have it for 1 or 2 sessions, but you won't have it for a season. They'll resent you.
And as I've been chatting there, Kirsty, you've sort of been there in a position where I've stacked a few questions in my mind as everyone's been speaking. I'm like, I just want to keep going back on that a minute, but they've been stacking. So when we talk about, that perception of you as a person, as a player, as a coach, I know that we've also talked about, and to touch upon that relationship, as Leigh says, which is really important. As I know through our conversations and what I see upon social media, you have such an immense relationship with your players, and hence why they keep coming back time and time again and enjoying those sessions. And I think that's a true testament to yourself and the key work that you're doing. So, perception in terms of how that comes across is one that can be difficult, that I know we've all dealt with, all been dealt with, and it's difficult. But as an outsider, from someone who's seen the work that you do, you uphold the fantastic reputation, as does Leigh and Georgia, but in terms of what you do, in terms of that impact and outcomes with players. But when we have faced a problem, and which, we've discussed, what steps did you take or do you take to stay true to your values as a coach and remaining committed to the game, which is really important, especially when we face certain barriers and what may be, the darker times of coaching, which is very unfortunate for when there is so much great work being delivered?
I think it's just all about reflection. So if you maybe, like, as you say, if you do a session and it maybe doesn't go bad and then you're analysing it in your head, sometimes you can get a bit lost. But if you kind of just sit yourself down, walk yourself through it and say, right, did that go well, or that maybe worked but then it didn't work, so how, why did it fail? And I think it's more just be honest with yourself. Don't say to yourself, oh, that went really well, if it didn't, because sometimes you can be faulty of that. Maybe like if one part of your session's failed but the rest of it's went really well, you'll sometimes forget about that one part. So it's always important to look back and say, why did that happen? How can I make it better for next time? Or what can I change that the players will maybe respond better to it? But I think, yeah, it's just about reflection. And I'm probably slightly different to the girls because the girls have played. I've never played football just because I wasn't allowed. So I always had that slight higher push, and I think I've never played. And every team that you go to, it's like, oh, who did you play for? And whenever you say, like, I don't play football, it's like, so why do you coach it? And it's always like that kind of, like, you're not allowed to coach if you haven't played. So you're held to a slightly different standard, or I hold myself to a slightly different standard because I don't have that playing experience. Whereas it's maybe easier for the girls to just walk in having played because you've already had that sort of experience of being a player, whereas I've just went straight to coach.
And when it comes down to that then, why weren't you allowed to play?
I don't have any cartilage in my left ankle.
Right, so more of a physical rather than, a social, cultural thing.
Yeah.
Right, fam. And when it comes down to it, then I'm very similar to you. That I didn't play to a very good level, and I wouldn't want to play on the same team as the girls above me because I doubt that I'd be very good compared to them, and they probably outclass me on the pitch. But when it comes down to it, then I am similar, and when I come down to some of the change rooms and being with the players, I know that I lack in some of the areas where I didn't have those experience in and out of the changing rooms and on the pitch. But I coach because I enjoy coaching. I want to see them grow and develop as players. So what I may bring to them is very different in terms of that mindset and psychology which I bring compared to that tactical side which is always on the pitch. So I'm a bit like you where I hold myself accountable in different ways because I never played to those high levels or played to a certain level. So I completely understand what you're saying there in terms of that. And when it comes down to perspective then, do you think it's about positioning yourself to really hold yourself different to those standards, or do you find it more beneficial to do it in terms of flipping that coin to be held in a different stance whereby you're true to those values, so therefore you're accountable to those because that's where you've pitched yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think holding yourself to a higher standard, it'll always encourage you to grow and reflect on how you can get to a certain point. So obviously you've obviously set yourself a goal, and how do you get to that goal? How can you keep your standards at a level that will help you develop to that goal? Because it's not only about obviously player development, it's also about your development as a coach, because there's only so far you can maybe go, and then you've got to maybe reflect yourself and say, right, I've reached that goal, so what is my next goal? It's not just a case of I've reached my goal, like I'll just stay here, I'm happy. It's always about holding yourself to those standards to say, right, I've done really well to get to that goal, so what's my next goal? So whether that be like Leigh, for example, whether that maybe be your E license, like you've got your B, so could I push myself to get my A, or am I quite happy where I am and I can just challenge myself in maybe different ages? So like maybe you would go under nines, for example, just slightly different, but still a kind of known environment that you're not going to walk in and be like the blind. You're going to have a rough idea, but it's just going to be a slightly different age group, so a slightly different challenge.
I remember someone saying at the end of the B licence, one of the tutors said, tomorrow when you walk out these doors, you might have a B licence to your name, but it doesn't make you a UFB coach. Overnight, you've got the basics now, and you've got the understanding of what a UFB coach is. It's up to you now to go away and grow and develop and keep pushing yourself to that next standard. Just because you finished UFB doesn't mean you're automatically ready for your A licence. It's You've had the basics, you've had the course, you've grown over the last 12 months. Now, how do you keep those standards and push yourself on to challenge you? I know now, sometimes I notice, because I've had the 15 to 9 years, you kind of do slip back in that social aspect and actually stick to what you know. What have you spent all that money and all the courses that you've been on? Stick to what you've learned and keep the high standards and push yourself. Because yes, it might not be an interest to push yourself on a course to keep growing, but how do you keep growing yourself as a coach where you're at? Because just because you have the qualification doesn't mean you're automatically that standard of coach.
Yeah, I think we have coaches have such an expectation that you want players to learn and develop all the time, and you see some coaches that might pass, say, the level 1 and then do nothing, stay in the same environment, doing the same team, same age group, no CPD and training, but they expect the players to get better. I don't think that's fair. But I think what you were saying just there about there's no rush. You see people try race through the qualifications, and there really isn't a rush. You could see someone finish the B licence, but there might be a level 2 or a UFC, so it's sort of on a better trajectory in terms of the development. They've got a more thorough knowledge, more technical, practical foundation than someone that might have just passed the B licence. It's not necessarily the qualification that makes it. I think it's the experiences that you have that make you learn, whether that's experiences on the course or off the course. But those that aren't willing to sort of push themselves to those new experiences, they're not developing, but they're expecting the players to develop.
Yeah, I think you notice that in like the professional game as well, because when you look at like a coach like Frank Lampard, so players obviously skip all the early stages and they go straight to the B's and A's. When you look at a player like him who became a manager, and then you look at managers that have taken their time and worked their way through their licenses and they've worked in grassroots and built themselves up, they're actually a better manager because they've taken their time and they've went through them and they've had different roles. Whereas I think players sometimes, just because they're professional players, they just get pushed right into their B's and their A's. But they're sometimes not actually a better coach than, as you say, something that's maybe a UEFA C, because they've taken their time to build up to that and they've went out and they've got the experience, and it's completely different playing to it as coaching. So for some of the players to just walk in and get their licenses and then become managers, you see them kind of not fail as such, but not succeed as well as other managers, and it's just because other managers have got that experience, they've got that time, they've worked their way up rather than just being pushed in at kind of that level.
Yeah, I heard something a couple of years ago. It was just because you've been skilled doesn't mean that you can teach, and it reflects the same in football. Just because you played it doesn't mean you can coach it. I mean, there's numerous examples of ex-players that really haven't done well, but equally there is lots of players that have done really well. I think it's ignorant to sort of skip that development, think that you're kind of above it.
I love that. I love that you've taken the floor away and you've absolutely taken the conversation and layered it. And it's been great to sit back and listen to all three of you, because you've created such interesting points and, taking it around in a way that you're all supportive of each other, but taking it in terms of those different considerations and pulling the bigger picture, which has really pieced together something which is so important. So, some of the outcomes there is not rushing your time, understanding, grinding through the levels, understanding what it actually means rather than accelerating the race. And in consideration, when you are trying to accelerate yourself, are you really standing upon those players which you are coaching and therefore impacting them detrimentally because you're standing on them moving quickly and not actually engaging with them or giving them the impact that they had? And working at a professional club like myself, I've seen so many coaches come and go. The players can't remember the names of half the coaches because they've come in, they've got their licenses, they've moved on. And then I still work with these players over a period of time, and I felt so sorry for them in a way because they've been sort of step-toed on for others to get to where they need to go, and these players actually haven't been considered in the bigger picture. But, as coaches, we become so emotionally invested, and, that relates very much to what Georgia is in her position when she coaches her friends. And because there is that emotional connection between how she is seen and what she sees that relationship as, and having that connection with players within that session whereby it is banterous, it is responsive, you are understanding the expectations and having that relationship. But when it comes down to it then, Leigh, do you think we have to become less emotional as coaches to look at things rationally and objectively?
Yeah, I think when I started out, if a player left, I really took it personally. And if someone would make a comment about my team, I was really offended because I thought that's my team and my players you're talking about. But I think as you grow, you could be in a room and everyone have a different opinion. Parents will have a different opinion to what you're seeing. They'll see something differently than what you're seeing. The players will see something differently on the pitch. I think it's just understanding and believe in yourself. You're not always going to make everyone happy. Understand your environment. Stick to what you know. Stick to what you believe in. You might not be the issue if someone's got a problem. They might be the issue. Remove the problem if that's the case. Do what's the best for your team. And I think you've got to understand what you've built. And yes, not everyone's opinion's got to be the same, but use what you know, and you do still get emotional. You put a lot of time and commitment in a voluntary role or even a paid role that sometimes you get pushed back on, but stick to what you know, believe in what you do, and if there is individuals that aren't on the same journey as you, maybe it's time for them to go on a different path, and that's okay. Not everyone's going to be on the same page always, but stick to you and your beliefs, and I think everything will be all right.
I think sometimes it's good to be emotional about it. So when I've coached the girls sometimes, and I went away and I thought that's an absolutely rubbish session. You feel like it's a rubbish session and not emotional about it, but you understand what I mean, because you're bothered about it. So I coached a group on Friday in the ETC, and it was my first session with them, and the session went okay. Like it went good, and when I came off, the parents complimented it. They said it was really good. But when I sort of fed back with some of my colleagues today at work, I was kind of like, it was okay. But you feel a little bit like that, or a little bit put out because you bothered about it. You want it to be really good for you and for them.
And I think sometimes if you have a session that's probably a step back to where your expectations are normally, sometimes it can become a benefit to your players. So we had a bit of a club event going on Thursday in between training. Why I decided to give 15-year-old boys Harry balls before a training session that then was pushing my limits because they were hyper, they were giddy because it was something different that wasn't the normal training session or the normal routine that we're normally in. So they're pushing, they're happy that they're all together. And in the end, I just really took a basic session. We were already 10 minutes late in starting. I really stripped it back. We had a little 3-team tournament. And actually, as a team, we were closer together and people were happier and together after the session. As a coach, I wasn't best pleased with it. It wasn't my usual standards. It wasn't my usual type of session. But did it benefit my players? 100%. And especially when we knew we didn't have a game on the Sunday, that little bit more of a relaxed environment gave them something back and a little bit of their ownership. Where on a pitch on a Sunday, it's over to you. We've done all we can in training. We're prepared as best we can. I can't play the game for you. I can make the changes. It's over to you. And it kind of gives them that little bit of responsibility that normally in a training they might not always have. So it swings and roundabouts. That you've got to care, but you've also got to stick to what you believe in. I think we all get emotional sometimes, and I think you reflect too much at times.
If the players weren't emotional about if they had a bad performance, you'd be questioning it. You'd wonder why they weren't bothered. So I think to not feel like that, or like to sort of exclude that feeling as a coach or pretend that it doesn't exist, isn't real.
Yeah, we had a conversation after the match last Sunday. Lots of things happened. We had a goal disallowed. We had probably about 20 shots on goals and we came away 2-1 down. And you're questioning how on earth did we come away with a loss? But it happens, and but we can see now they're getting older. They care about their performance. It's a competitive league. They're in a competitive environment in the age group they're in. We want them to care. And you can start to see now. I had one kick the bag of footballs when I announced my starting lineup. They cared that they were starting off as sub. I didn't put them as sub because they'd done something wrong or they wasn't strong enough for my starting lineup. I've got 16 players. I'm trying to rotate it around. You'll probably share a position with someone else on the pitch, but they care, and I think it's important you care and important your players care.
Like, we had a game, it was the day of the World Cup final, and both teams watched it in the clubhouse, then we played afterwards. And at half time, we were winning 7-1. We were an absolute ball of a game. And at full time, we won 8-7. Don't ask me how it happened because I'm still really not sure. But as every goal flew into the back of our net, I'm looking at the manager thinking, and inside you're emotional, you're thinking, what is going on? But it's how you regulate it and how it looks to the players. And if you're frantic, they're frantic, and we should just hold on. I think it's how it comes across to the players, and in the times where it is emotional and frantic, and you're mirroring the behaviours that you want them to display is important.
And I think that's an important concept there, because something which someone said to me in education once is what you radiate is what others will feel from you. And so if you are frantic in terms of teaching or being within that session or lesson, when you're stressing, you're getting everything up front, then you're going to make others feel that way. So that's something that I've taken in consideration, is how calm can I feel around others, which brings them down. And I work in a behaviour unit in school, so I get to see the worst of the worst and work with some of our most challenging pupils, but it's one that I enjoy. So a question that I get asked is, how do you remain so calm? I'm like, I've got to remain calm, because the moment I go up there is the moment I bring them up as well. And that's some of the reasons why they end up in the behaviour unit, is because some of the teachers have gone straight up, and so have they. So they've led the negative responses. So we've seen those unwanted behaviours as to then why they're working with me. So I love being in that part of it, because I get to work with the psychology, I get to work with those players, and I get students, and I get to look at that mindset, how they can reapproach it. And the same with the players that we coach and manage, and how can we manage those responses and develop the skills so they are resilient, so they can take things on board, they can receive certain information, they're very understanding of feedback, and be in that position where they're where they're able to regulate, as Georgia said, and be in that position where they can really hold on to games or take ownership of their learning, etc. So when it comes down to it then, as one final question, how do we develop skills, Kirsty, in players that are meaningful, impactful and lifelong?
I think they're just constantly challenging them. So obviously, like as we say, sometimes you'll maybe have a player who stands out in your squad that maybe doesn't want to move up. So like we were saying, if you've maybe got a player and you give them the option of you can move up and continue your development, but they don't want to because their friends are in that age group, it's coming up with ways that you can still challenge them to develop their skills. Because if you've got a player who is a kind of standout and you're doing the same things as everybody else, they're not going to develop the same way the rest of your team are developing their skills because you're aiming it at the team. So maybe just giving that one player that little bit extra and saying, right, I want you to try this. So keep it kind of similar, but just slightly tweaking it so that it is a wee bit more challenging for them, so that they can go with the rest of the team and they're building up to make the step up so that they feel comfortable. Because it could be a case of, although their friends are maybe in that team, they don't want to move up because they're younger or they don't think they're good enough, or there's loads of different, obviously, reasons why. So if you can just keep building them up and getting their skills going and building their confidence so that it's more of a seamless transition into the next team and they're at that level rather than feeling like they're going to go from kind of top of the chart to right down to the bottom.
I love that, and I think that is such a fantastic answer. But Leigh, what are two skills that you'd love to develop in your players, which you'd like them to take away that may be impactful and lifelong lasting?
I think one, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think sometimes players will stick to what they know or stick to what they're comfortable with, and I think even as a player in training, I'm always a player that wants the football at my feet. I don't like the ball when it's in the air, but if I don't put myself in an uncomfortable position to get better, when it comes to a match day, I'm not going to improve. So I think for me, it's making sure you're challenging players in the right way, but they're uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think with mine, just keep growing how we are. We're in a really good position at the minute, challenging in the right ways, but making sure we don't have that competitive edge, but making sure we don't lose that enjoyment side of it. I think that's key in the age group we are now with the 15s, that they still enjoy it, they're still with their friends, but we're challenging them and making sure they're ready to go and compete on a Sunday.
Absolutely, I love that. And Georgia, two from you.
In terms of skills, I think I'd struggle. I just want them to sort of enjoy it and understand why in everything that they do. So whether they're 3-year-old or 30-year-old, they need to have a good time, so they keep coming, but they need to know why you're doing it and what you're doing it for, or why it's necessary, why you need to do it that way. And without that, I feel like people struggle to connect the dots.
And two from you, Kirsty.
I think I would agree with Leigh, like comfortable in an uncomfortable position, because there's so many players that are probably similar that like a certain style, that to get better you've got to put yourself in those positions that mixes the style up. So whether that be you like it at your feet and you don't like it in the air, but put yourself in that position so that you then like it in the air, and making enjoyment, like building their confidence so that they can just go out and they can be free rather than saying like you have to do this, you have to do that. Just let them be free, let them enjoy themselves, and then if need be you can step in, but ultimately just let them play. Like that's where they express themselves more, when you just give them a ball and just let them go, and then you can start to do your wee tweaks if needed.
I love that, and I think it's brilliant. And you've all been fantastic upon this. But if I had to just pose one more question, what are 3 non-negotiables that you hold true to you? So I'll start with you, Leigh.
Oh, train hard. Train hard. Take into a match day what we've done in training. And I just think being an understanding player and a manager, have that understanding of that not every player is going to have the best game. Not every player comes in the right mindset, but be that understanding and caring player, and as a manager and a player, just understanding that you've got to put an arm around someone at times, and you do it as a team.
Free from you, Kirsty.
Train the way you play, because I've noticed some players training's a bit of a carry on. They're with their friends. It's just a bit of carry on because there's no like pressure, and then on match day it's like completely different people. So train the way you play so that you're constantly at that standard. Being approachable. So like we said earlier, like being there for your player. So whether that be your player needs advice or just to talk about something, or if they've had a bad day at school or college or whatever, just to be there to just take their mind off it and just be fun. Like no one wants a big shouting machine. Just be fun and have a laugh with them to an extent. Obviously still keep professionalism, but just make it a fun environment so that they enjoy coming. That's their escape away from school life or work life or whatever their day-to-day situation is. Football's their escape, it's their safe zone, so make it as enjoyable and as fun as you can so that their mind is just on football and they're not thinking about anything else.
What a top answer and quote in terms of that, building upon Leigh's fantastic answer. Now, Georgia, what are your 3 non-negotiables? And I am maybe in the back of my mind expecting an alternative answer from you.
Yeah, I'm running out of them now. You've come to me last. I think my biggest one is just try. I don't care whether you're good or you're rubbish. You need to try. I feel like if you don't try, that comes with a lack of respect, which I'm going to double up as my second one. Respect for coaches, each other, the environment that you're in. If you're going into, say, like an away game and things like that, respecting other people, the ref, treat people how you want to be treated. But then for the third one, just be a coach, but be a human. Just be a personable, approachable. Have a chat with them. You know, as you're waiting outside the 3D, don't talk about football, talk about anything else but football. You know, they might have just had a baby, or like the kids might be going into school and things like that for the first time, and people have got other things on their mind a lot bigger than football, and sometimes they're not there to talk about the football. They're just there to have a bit of a laugh and a release.
And what a wrap up to what has been an amazing time spent with all 3 of you. It not only has been wonderful to meet you all individually and record individual episodes, but to see your growth all across the year in terms of what you've done in terms of personal and professional lives, in terms of where you're going, what you're at, and how different things may look. But those progression of roles, you know, you've all progressed in terms of what you've done. But to bring this back together and to piece together what has been a perfect combination of 3 wonderful individuals giving their absolute experiences, life advice, and their fantastic professional outlooks, and demonstrating the wonderful work that they do. You've honestly set the benchmark in terms of the rest of the episodes to come, but also help build upon the podcast even more. But whilst, you know, you've been working all day, and I'm very conscious of that, and making sure you get some evening back and maybe some tea if you haven't had it. Honestly, I've been looking forward to this all day long and couldn't wait to get home. And it's honestly been such a fantastic part of the week where it's set not only the benchmark for the rest of the series, but the benchmark for the rest of my week to enjoy those that I've been around. So I really appreciate your time on the pod, and I'd love to sit here for another hour and a half and listen to you all. But what a perfect combination of coaches to put together on a fantastic podcast episode. So it's a huge thank you from me, and I really appreciate it, and hope you have a great rest of the evening and week.
Oh,
Cheers, thank you.
Such a pleasure. Well, take care, and I'll catch up with you soon. But enjoy what you're doing, keep impacting the world, and stay amazing.
You too.
Thank you very much.
See you later.
See you all
Thanks.
soon.
Yeah.
I think it would just be obviously seeing what personalities you've got, how they work together, and how best you can get them to work with your team, as in like coaching staff and the other players. Obviously, you might have people that are completely opposites in terms of their personality, but everybody's love for the game is what brings them together. So how can you use football to make the team dynamic work and everybody gets on? They're all there for the one game. They're all there to play football, enjoy themselves playing football. So it's getting the love for the game and the enjoyment of the game to make all these personalities click and work together, because 9 times out of 10 the kids are there because they want to be there. They want to play football. They want to play with their friends or maybe play with new friends. There's loads of different sort of aspects of the game itself. So using that and the kids' passion of that to work all together is probably the best sort of pinpoint, because what might work for one personality might not work for another personality in terms of maybe like the way you coach or whatever. So it's kind of that dynamic of everybody loves the game, so how can we make the game work for person A to person B?